Hello and welcome to Washington Unplugged. I'm John Dickerson. Everyone in Washington is still talking about last Friday's question and answer session between President Obama and House Republicans. The 90 minutes of give and take was an example of the kind of civil but passionate discourse politicians and voters say they want. Was it a glimmer that change might be possible, or will everyone return to partisan point scoring? One of the president's questioners from that session is with us today. Congressman Jason Chaffetz of Utah asked the president about a series of broken promises, including his pledge to broadcast health care debates on C-SPAN. Let's take a look.
There's some things that have happened that I would appreciate your perspective on, because I can look you in the eye and tell you we have not been obstructionists. The Democrats have the House, the Senate, and the presidency. When you stood up before the American people multiple times and said you would broadcast the health care debates on C-SPAN, you didn't. I was disappointed, and I think a lot of Americans were disappointed.
If you look at the health care process just over the course of the year, overwhelmingly, the majority of it actually was on C-SPAN because it was taking place in congressional hearings in which you guys were participating. I mean, how many committees were there that helped to shape this bill? Countless hearings took place. Now, I kicked it off, by the way, with a meeting with many of you, including your key leadership. What is true, there's no doubt about it, is that once it got through the committee process, and there were now a series of meetings taking place all over the Capitol trying to figure out how to get the thing together. That was a messy process. And I take responsibility for not having structured it in a way where it was all taking place in one place that could be filmed.
Congressman Jason Chaffetz now joins us from New York. Congressman, I want to start by asking you if you were satisfied with the president's answer.
Well, it was an honor to have him there. I was proud of the Republicans for inviting him, and it was good of the president to be there. And without a teleprompter, just having a good, solid dialogue with the Republicans. It was good.
Now, Congressman, you got a little shot in there with the teleprompter, but I want to ask you about the new spirit of bipartisanship. Was he making good on his claim to be bipartisan, or was he just giving you the business there on his answer in response to your question?
Oh, I think he was being honest and sincere, and I hope it's the beginning of a new continued dialogue that, quite frankly, hasn't been there in the past. So I think it was a win for both sides. That's a kind of exchange that should happen out in the open, in the public. I think it's good for the process and should be good moving forward.
And your colleagues, after the president came and visited, you had conversations in the halls. What was the takeaway? What did everybody think about this process, perhaps as it goes forward, and about his performance?
I think if we could work directly with the president, you could certainly see some progress. Now, how we translate that same type of openness and communication and dialogue with Nancy Pelosi and the House Democrats, as well as Harry Reid and the House Senators, that's a whole different equation. And maybe not quite as optimistic about that portion of it as I am working with the White House.
The response, it seemed to me, Leader Boehner put out a press release later in the day saying the president used discredited information in his answers to the questions. It seems like I'm hearing two messages from Republicans. On the one hand, folks saying largely what you are, which is that this was a nice and good opening and constructive dialogue, and then press releases and other remarks that say the president was dishonest, he was not answering the questions. Where are we? What's the actual response here?
Well, there's a lot of content in 90 minutes. I think what we did put to bed is this idea and this notion that you continually hear from the Democrats is the Republicans are the party of no, that they're obstructionists, that they don't have any good ideas. I think all of that was put to rest, not only in our words, but in the president's words, in saying that he had read the bills, that they were substantial ideas, particularly Paul Ryan's idea, the roadmap for America. Those types of things, I think, in that exchange it was clear that some of the talking points that we heard from the left really aren't quite as true as maybe they sounded like. And that's the kind of dialogue with the president that you would hope would come to that sort of conclusion.
Is there an effort from Republicans, based on this new dialogue, to perhaps respond differently to the president, or to take something away from this meeting? If he's got a list of things he needs to do to make good on his promises of bipartisanship, what can Republicans do on their side?
Well, after the meeting, I shook the president's hand and I said, look, I'm not here to just take pot shots at you. I'll work with you. If there's an open door, of course I'll work with you. So I think the president was sticking his hand out. I'm not going to just bite it off. We're going to disagree on some things, and as long as we do so in a respectful way, that's fine. But if we're not even having the dialogue, then there'll be even more frustration. But right now, hey, look, my job is not to be a cheerleader for the president. It's to hold him accountable and to fight for the ideals and the principles that I believe in, and I know he'll do the same. But there's a lot we do agree on, and with those portions, that's what we should be working on for the American people.
In terms of this new tone, let's try it out here now. The president's released the blueprint for his budget for this year in the spirit of bipartisanship and warm feelings from the Baltimore meeting. What's your reaction to it?
Well, I've got serious concerns about it. I haven't read every line of it. It's just coming out today. But if we're spending more money and we're not making dramatic cuts, I'll have a hard time with it, because I don't think the answer is to spend more money. And so there may be some good places to cut, but there are probably more places to cut that are not expressed in the president's budget. So again, even though I may disagree with it, doesn't mean I'm going to not work with them. I am going to work with them, but I'd like to see the cuts go much deeper than what the president is proposing as a top-line number.
And what would you like to see from him in this process? The budget process is long and messy. That would let you know that he's actually living up to the spirit he's talking about in terms of the budget. I mean, what would you like to see change out of this White House in how they go forward with it?
Well, an open door, a candid dialogue, an actual interaction. And again, I think the biggest part of this equation is how are we going to work with the House Democrats? Because it's oftentimes that Nancy Pelosi part of the equation that becomes untenable, much more so than the White House. And so if we can structure the process in such a way where we are able to offer amendments, where there is an open rule on the floor of the House that we can offer striking amendments and whatnot, then I think you'll find the process to be better for the end result. Contentious at times, but that's the type of debate we're supposed to have on the floor of the House. So a lot of this is dependent upon Nancy Pelosi, even more so than on the president himself.
Last question, Congressman. Do you think we'll have this kind of interaction again going forward between the president and the House caucus of Republicans?
I hope so. I think both sides walked away saying, hey, that was good for us. I think the American people loved it. I think the media got access to something that usually never happens. So I'm an optimist, of course. I like the exchange with the president. I want to follow up with him on a week-by-week basis, and I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, Congressman Jason Chaffetz, thanks very much for your time.
Hey, thank you. Thank you.
For reaction, we now turn to Democratic strategist Chris Kofinis in Des Moines, Iowa. Chris, I wanted to get your reaction to the congressman and to the, well, let's start with the congressman. What did you think of his remarks?
Well, I mean, it kind of, I think, fits the uncomfortableness that Republicans have right now, where they're trying to, pretend that they're interested in bipartisanship, but then they sit there and take shots at the president. And you just saw multiple. He started off with a shot when he was talking about the spirit of bipartisanship. So, I mean, it goes both ways. I understand that's part of the political game. But I think sometimes, it doesn't serve the bigger interest. And I think Republicans sometimes in this current political climate, they're looking at what happened in New Jersey, Virginia, and Massachusetts, and I think they're getting the wrong message. And if they think, being the obstructionist, party of no, party of bad ideas, and pretending they're good ideas is the way you're going to solve these problems and then also win over American voters, I just don't think that is going to work effectively.
One of the things about this Friday meeting with Republicans is that the president talked about bipartisanship and trying to lower the point scoring that goes on, but then almost immediately after it was over, Democrats and people from the White House were saying what a great job he did. He pushed back Republicans, made them, look not as good, that he came away the clear winner. I mean, the points were being tallied before his conversation was over. It's a mixed message.
Well, I don't know if it's a mixed message. I think it's just the reality of how. I mean, one, it was a very unique event to have that televised. To those of us who love politics, it reminded me a little bit of the British House of Commons, and so in that sense, it was quite fascinating. And I think the part where I think the White House was very pleased was, in a lot of these debates, the debates and the critiques will be separate from one another. And here you had the President of the United States answering, I think, the charges and the critiques and the points that the Republicans were making, and I would say in almost every instance was batting them down pretty aggressively. And when you're talking, when the Republicans were getting up there and critiquing the president about the deficits, and the Republicans weren't acknowledging the fact that the president inherited a $1.3 trillion deficit, he was right to point out how disingenuous that is. And I think it was good dialogue, but by no means is it going to usher in a new era of partisan, bipartisan cooperation. That's going to take time. It's going to be spotty in other places. But I think it was good because it does, I think, give to the American people a glimmer of that, these two sides can at least start talking to each other.
One of the things we heard from Congressman Chaffetz is the splitting or distinction between President Obama and the congressional leaders of the Democratic Party, Speaker Pelosi and Senator Reid. Clearly, it seems that Republicans are training their fire on them. Doesn't the president, by creating this sort of sense of bipartisanship, isolate Pelosi and Reid a little bit and politically make things difficult for them?
I don't think so, because one, it's kind of ironic when you hear about the Republicans talk about the spirit of bipartisanship. When they controlled the House, they were exactly the same, if not more so, in terms of dominating, controlling the agenda. That is how it happens when a new party is in the majority. Putting that aside for a second, I think, this is, where we sometimes get, mixed up in the political dynamics. When you poll, for example, do you want bipartisanship to voters? It's like asking voters, do you want ice cream? Of course they're going to say yes, they love it. But at the end of the day, what voters want, and I believe this is true for Republicans, Democrats, and Independents, is for government to address their problems. And I think, Speaker Pelosi and Democrats are willing to do that, but they're not willing to do that if the Republicans are simply proposing ideas that for when they were in power didn't work and actually made the problems worse. So that is, I think, the schism and the gulf that is not going to be easily overcome.
Right, but as you heard the congressman say, and then I've talked to a number of Republicans this weekend, they now have sound of this president saying that they are a party that has ideas. It's not just the party of no. And that's a counter message to the one we're hearing out of congressional Democrats and Democrats in the Senate, which is that this is an obstructionist Republican party. And so the messages seem at cross purposes here.
Well, listen, the proof is going to be in the pudding. The legislative session has begun. The budgetary process has begun. We still have major policy issues for the Congress to deal with at both the Senate and the House level. It is going to be interesting to see how the Republicans play this game. Are they going to play the game where they basically offer ideas that the Democrat majorities can't deal with, whether it's on the deficit, whether it's on spending, whether it's on health care, education, whatever it might be. If they do that, if they simply offer ideas that there's no way Democrats can accept because they simply are discredited, then I think you're going to have a problem. Now, if they offer good ideas and they're willing to cooperate, then I think there is an obligation on Democrats to work with that. But that has not happened as of yet, I would say.
Let me get your final reaction to a strategy that a lot of Democratic strategists have put forward, and that we saw, in fact, in the Scott Brown race in Massachusetts, when the president went up there and made a very populist argument, argued that soon-to-be Senator Brown was in the pocket of the insurance companies and the big banks, that he was trying to pull the wool over the eyes of Massachusetts voters. And that there are Democrats who say this is the kind of hard message in a tough year in tight districts that needs to be put forward, not this kind of warmer, everybody let's be bipartisan message. What's your view on that?
Well, when it comes to elections, I think, voters like focus and clarity. They want to see that there is a distinction between the two. If that gets muddled, it becomes a little bit more confusing. Now, given the current, I think, political climate and, the feelings of the electorate, what's, I think, really interesting is, especially, and I think you saw this in all the three big statewide races, there is really an anti-politician streak. It's not an anti-incumbent just. It's not anti-Democrat or anti-Obama. It's not pro-Republican. It's that voters, I think, are frustrated with what they see as Washington not working to address their problems. So whichever side, I think, does a better and more effective job of saying to voters, we stood up and fought for the issues that you care about in terms of health care, education, jobs, and the economy in particular, I think is going to have the advantage. Whichever candidate, whether Republican or Democrat, if they talk out of both sides of their mouth, that they play the traditional political game. They're exposing themselves and making themselves, I think, very vulnerable to an angry electorate that right now can swing both ways. So what's interesting to me is, looking at this from electoral perspective, it is a very volatile electorate. And I know the Republicans think it's their year. It could swing dramatically different ways, especially if the bigger picture in terms of the economy, if that starts, we start getting more positive news. We saw the GDP numbers. We start getting more positive news. The Republican and their message is going to start getting boxed in. So it's going to be a very interesting election to watch.
Okay, Chris Kofinis from Des Moines, thanks very much. Thanks all of you for watching Washington Unplugged. Join us again tomorrow on CBSNews.com. I'm John Dickerson. Have a great day.